drop some dope knowledge on you guys, and we want to let you know that we highly, highly encourage you to make outreach to licensed professionals with a track record of success. Do your own research thoroughly. And then as you learn more, each one, reach one, teach one, because that's how we learn and grow as a community. Welcome to the asset class.
Already. So as we talk about building community, because each of these episodes is another brick in the foundation of truly building that community of not only, in consulting, it was conveyed to me as paralysis through analysis. And what that basically means is you got someone that is so intent on understanding how things work and just constantly just thinking. And meanwhile, that thought pattern becomes like a pattern of paralysis in which we're not making any progress. We're obtaining all of this knowledge, all of this information, even getting new experiences, but not putting any of it to work because it's always just thinking, like paralysis through analysis. And that's one of the primary responsibilities and deliverables of this podcast is to take the invaluable information that is readily available, because none of the things that Earl and I talk about on these episodes are rocket science or, hidden information. Like, it's all public information, but it's a matter of how the information is processed and implemented. And we speak to implementation, actually how we get the bag out the mud and keep it pushing and building the community and a stronger ecosystem.
Brother, we're always talking about knowledge isn't power. Application of knowledge is power. And if you can apply that knowledge in a timely manner with proficiency, we're talking about moving the needle. And that's what people need right now. In these times of doubt and insecurity and people are a little bit lost, we got to take action and we got to control the controllables. So we got so much to talk about in today's episode. My goodness.
100%. So as we speak about controlling the controllables, oftentimes when coming into New Year and it's time to think about what the goal for the year looks like, truthfully, what that looks like behind the scenes for a lot of small business owners is them just coming up with some arbitrary ass number completely out of nothing. Like, all right, so I did 500,000 last year. I'm going to do 1.2 this year. And that's just like, that's what we're going to do. And it's nothing behind that. So we're going to take the 1.2 million, and now in order to measure how close that we are to hitting that arbitrary goal is to just split it by 12. So as long as we hitting the 12th of that each month, then we're on track to hit our arbitrary $1.2 million goal that we've established for ourselves. When it comes to controlling what we can control, if we know, and there's no feelings about it, like it's documented, it was reported to the IRS. In 2024, we generated this amount of revenue. And then in 2025, I know, that reconciliation process for a lot of business owners is still happening right now as far as reconciling 2025 fully, unfortunate. But as we close out 2025, we know through true percentage analysis if that was a growth or contraction and what that percentage is. So we either made more in 2025 than we made in 2024, or we made less in 2025 than we made in 2024. Either way, there is a percentage, or we remain flat.
Mm-hmm.
But either way, there's a percentage that's associated with the shift from 24 to 25, which then gives us a realistic goal to work toward when we're talking in 2026. So if we know that we increased our revenue 5% from 2024 to 2025, then we now have a reasonable kind of perimeter to set our goals for, unless we have some just out of the park marketing strategy, or we just inked this deal, or in other words, a lot of the work from in the past has just kind of shown up. And now we're like measuring our growth on what we're looking at as actualized opportunity. You know, obviously that's a different calculation, but the average business owner that's just getting it out the mud aren't seeing those opportunities every day. So in order to establish true measurable goals and targets, going back to what you said, Earl, controlling what you can control, that's something that we can control. We know what that growth looks like. So from that, if we then look at, as we're planning 2026, and this methodology goes into 2027 and beyond, it is about setting markers so that you understand what good looks like, and we just not floating through the life of operating in business like willy-nilly. We're intentional. We know that we are making progress because our goals are realistic. From the measurement of 2024 to 2025, we understand what 2026 looks like realistically. Now, with that, when we talk about performance throughout the course of the year, there are seasonal effects, predictable seasonal effects, depending on industry. And whatever that those effects are leverage points. So for a contractor that at the end of the year traditionally plans for there to be a slowdown, then that's an opportunity to market for other revenue streams that the business provides for those services, as opposed to just saying, all right, well, it's just historically slow during this time, so it's going to be slow. Like, no, what are we doing to change that? So in order to account for seasonality, when we look back at 2025 and we split out every month as a percentage of the total revenue. In other words, in January, we generated 20% of the total revenue. In February, we generated 9% of the total revenue. In March, so on and so forth, up to the full 100% of that generated revenue. We get an idea of what our seasonality looks like. Through that analysis, we can intentionally now, as we're in week 9 of the year, understand how close that we are to plus or minus the baseline, which in this conversation is what we did in 2025 to establish realistic, controllable goals for 2026 and beyond.
In that space, I like to, talk about the mind piece of it. When you control controllables, you are also killing off the loss of energy. Every single person, regardless of how much coffee or whatever you're putting into your body to try to stay alert and try to fight, you have a certain amount of energy that your body can put out. If we put all of our energy into controlling the controllables versus looking at this, looking at that, trying to maybe go after a goal that is not good for our business. Jesse could tell you, I could tell you, I've seen businesses make unrealistic goals, accomplish them in a manner that destroyed their business. Because it's outside the ethos of what the business is, what the core culture is, or what the core demographic you really want your business to be. So you got to keep the main thing the main thing. One of my favorite misquoted quotes of all time, talking about Rome, Rome wasn't built in a day, but it burned in one. That's the whole quote. People only say the beginning, Rome wasn't built in a day, but it burned in one. We're talking about one of the largest nations to ever exist in history, destroyed in a day.
Speaking of Rome, because controlling the controllables, if something is completely new, it's never happened, then we really have to adjust and just kind of, move forward. But if it's already occurred in history, Rome being an example of it, then we can learn from those past experiences to avoid, or if not avoid, more seamlessly navigate through those challenges.
Yeah, mitigate and minimize.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So to that point, this month, we have been going deep relative to Black history and how the assets in history have been weaponized against our advancement, and how those historical realities have laid the framework for the opportunity of today. But we can't fully leverage all of that without really bringing it all together. So, Earl, as you kind of think back on the Don DeMarco bars you've been dropping over the course of the month, what brings everything together for you, my brother?
Well, I just think, as I've said in many episodes through our African American history series here on the podcast, this is a diagnosis. One of my other favorite misquoted quotes of all time is, pull yourself up by your bootstraps. It's a misquote of Martin Luther King Jr. Because if you tell a man with no boots to pull himself up by his bootstraps, you're exercising cruelty. So this diagnosis is how we can understand how America perfected systematic racism. Now, does that mean we don't have opportunities here? Does it mean that I don't love America? Absolutely not. There are so many opportunities every single day, and there are opportunities that AI is creating new jobs. Is it displacing other workers? Yes. Is it also creating new markets and new opportunities? Yes. So I say all that as I hop back in, the very first week, we had to start with the foundation. So we were talking about the transatlantic slave trade and how that was the birth of insurance. Not many people knew that. Not many people knew the mental hurdles that these large institutions would do to be able to mitigate risk. And that's something that you have to do in your own business. That's something you have to do in your own life. I get mad every time I hear there's someone dumb every 2 years with a big audience. They come out, you don't need life insurance. You don't need homeowners. Let me show you how it's done. Look, them little $50 a month, the $100 a month is keeping your family from catastrophic loss is better spent there than going into their little Dave Ramsey type of ETF or whatever they're doing. Trust that. Now, we didn't get to benefit off of the billions of dollars that were being made through insurance, because remember, if you were with us in that first episode, they separated our liberty and made it an asset, because a lot of them were still Roman Catholic, and it was a sin to put a price on a life. That changed. But in the beginning, they were saying they were ensuring the liberty of the enslaved person, and that liberty was building enterprise for them. It's crazy, like the mental hoops they jumped through to make this go. So that means we need to be insured, and we need to be insured the right way. Is one of the easiest ways to preserve your wealth, because there's not having money problems, there's getting money problems, and there are I have money problems. It's 3 different levels to this. And on that journey, you have to become accustomed to certain habits and tools to get you to unlock the next level. So trying to cheap out on your car insurance, I understand it is way overpriced right now. I get it. Like, Maco's deductibles out, because the lower your deductible is, the higher the chance of you using that to cover some loss. So the insurance company takes extra premium and they put it in their bank account. If you have a higher deductible, that means you have a lower chance of using their product and their money. So that surplus of money goes in your account. Don't blow it. Put it somewhere safe. Put it in storage. I don't even really like using the word savings because people blow savings. But what about wealth storage? That means that money has a purpose. So let's make sure every single dollar that we work hard for works even harder for us.
Break that down, Earl. That wealth storage piece is huge. A dollar sitting is a dollar losing. But when you've got it in that wealth storage protection category, speak to what that means.
Wealth storage means you're putting that money into a place where it is very, very, very unlikely to go anywhere. It's a place to sit that money until you could capitalize it to work for you, because money makes a terrible master, but it is an amazing worker. It will work while you sleep. So when we have a plan, like a lot of businesses will look at the revenue and they say, okay, the owner, and these are just super basic numbers, not mean to apply this at home, but a lot of businesses, what they teach you in business school, what they taught me in business school, okay, so you're going to take, about 50% of the gross, you're going to pay yourself with that, then you pay your taxes, and then the rest of this money, 10% is going to go to business savings, and then the rest you're going to enhance the business with. We are far more advanced than that. But those are just numbers as far as a talking point. When we're talking about every single time you get a check, you need to take some amount of money and you need to put it in wealth storage. And that's not money to blow, that's money to grow. So wealth storage could be a lot of things. There are some people that really, really love infinite banking. So they put it in a whole life policy or an index universal life policy.
What does that do by putting it into that type of account?
Well, the beautiful thing about life insurance, it's so old that it predates all of the tax laws. So the Constitution had to be written in a way to where it's a tax-free environment for your money to grow. So you could borrow against that money tax-free. So it's like a Roth on steroids. And for many, many years, it was called the rich man's Roth. So there's a great book out there called How the Rockefellers Would Have Done It, and by Garrett Gunderson. It just shows you frameworks of wealth where you're storing this money, and this money is doing more than one thing for you. We could borrow against it to buy more assets, but every time we pass away, there's a death benefit that pays out, and it makes the entire family wealthier. So just after 2 or 3 generations, your family is worth hundreds of millions of dollars. And this is starting from like a blue collar. You can do this. So it's a beautiful place to be when you place that money strategically, because then you get options. The whole reason we want to have wealth and we want you to be empowered is so you could say no to everything that doesn't align with your soul. Look, I'm not out here hustling because I want to have some crazy vehicle that's part spaceship and all that kind. Like, that stuff's cool, it's fun. You know what's dope? Every time I've ever been in a partnership or at a job or something, and they didn't treat me right, and they didn't treat me like the man that I am, I was out, and my lifestyle did not change. And I want all of you to have that. But the dream that's even bigger than that is to be so affluent that you can do that for others. That's why we are building cash flowing businesses. So the next piece that we hopped over to, we went straight from the insurance portion. Everybody needs life insurance. If you don't have it, please reach out. I will help you. We'll get you living benefits. We'll make sure that regardless of, heart attack, stroke, any of that kind of stuff, that you get a large sum of money to live your life and you don't have to touch your investments, because that's what mitigating risk is. The next piece we went to was land. Is one of the few things that is not in production. We're pretty much done on that. And according to certain people, there's less and less of it with rising tides. Land banks were given to European immigrants. They were given loans to be able to get the equipment they needed to till it up. And they didn't really have the skills to do it. So they went back to the African man and the African woman Irish and put them right back on those plantations. And it was a powerful way to build immense wealth. We talked about it here, how when enslaved people were freed, slave masters got paid life insurance policy payouts on their bodies. And then the U.S. government also paid. They said, you lost your property, we're going to take care of you. Some of the wealth that we see today by some of the same people saying the same things has come from our government paying them and indemnifying them for losses that they didn't have for the freedom of a person. That is insane. So with land, it is almost never a bad time to buy land, and you could buy it for next to nothing. And right now, my partners and I, we do so much stuff in the tax and wealth planning space. We have this amazing tiny home deal. Well, in the big, beautiful bill, there's a whole bunch of tax breaks that come from tiny homes. Now, you can either use those personally. If you have the land, someone else can put it there, and it can be leased 60-40. Or vice versa. Someone with the land, you could put them on there, lease it out 60-40. And it's just a beautiful place to be able to build wealth, to be able to say, I own this. We talked about it here on this very channel. There is a beautiful dream to say, I own something when I was once considered property here. The first commodities ever traded here were black bodies in Wall Street. It wasn't stocks. So it's beautiful that we have the ability to do that. Once you have that land, what's the next progression? Real estate. And if you ask any fake wealth influencer how to get rich, they'll be like, oh, real estate. But they're not going to tell you what kind, how to buy it, when to buy it, what the numbers should look like. I'm a big fan of people getting their money together and then using real estate as a tax offset. So you get an asset and you're paying less taxes because we're both in. It's not either or. It's not either make money or have assets. It's both and. and then put yourself in a position where you start leveraging this real estate. And remember, the real estate doesn't have to be here. If y'all have been listening to us, look, we are so cold on picking up these different pieces in Ghana and UAE and a few other places that I can't even tell you yet. Because you got to listen to more podcast episodes.
Man, the one piece that I do want to add in there is commercial real estate. The commercial real estate market has a substantial amount of challenges right now. And as all of those things get worked out, there's a lot of opportunity that's going to come from it. So to be ahead of what's going to come of the commercial real estate market, because from the time that COVID like really exposed a lot of vulnerabilities, there had already been commercial real estate vulnerabilities going into it, but because the amount of folks that were sent home, so now you got all of these buildings that were sitting empty, and the government was telling people to stay home, and it was just a lot of stuff that added a lot of pressure to the commercial real estate market. And that pressure has been cooking like crock pot style for quite a while. So when it does finally blow and do what it does, there's going to be a lot of opportunity on the other side. So to position to be ready for when that time does come, which, I mean, in part, it's here. It's a lot of commercial real estate that's available that people they would love to be able to get rid of. And because at the end of the day, someone's net worth is based on the assets in their portfolio. But when we start talking about the true value of those assets, you can own a building that on paper is worth $5 million. But if nobody is willing to pay $5 million for your building, then guess what? It ain't worth $5 million. It's what the market will bear.
I just went through this where I had an MLO reach out to me and said, hey, can you help get this business funded? Let's look at it. It's a mall in Minnesota, and the asking price was roughly $25 million. So they were trying to get the funding from me to be able to procure it and do this and this and this and that. Man, $25 million building in 2019 is not a $25 million building today. Shout out to my dude, Fat Joe. Yesterday's price is not today's price. You feel me? So that went left very quickly. When they could only get about $13.1 million, people got in their feelings, and it was a whole thing. But it's like, this is numbers over feeling. And the funny thing that always blows me away, because, you know, we're both so young to be doing what we're doing, where it's a lot of elder statesmen doing what we're doing. Most of the time when I go to, you know, a big industry event, people are between 60 and 75. So for me to see guys in their 50s and 60s losing their mind over numbers that they knew didn't make sense, I just feel like, who raised y'all?
That goes back to the core of why they did what they did to begin with. So many people go with the wave. You got to look at humanity, how we are conditioned as a society. Like, we go with the wave. It just so happens in a lot of our communities, the wave starts out where it's like the opportunity is some form of entertainment, some form of illegality to survive. And it's a lot that goes into all of that, namely a lot of the things that you have like brilliantly covered over the course of this month that created these environments that produce the result, which again, when we're looking at those as being our opportunities to make something shake, then That's what we gravitate toward. When you in these other rooms and you recognize the 60, 70, the ones you referencing, and you find out that when they were 13 years old, their dad was talking to them about this, and like they were seeing it. As kids, they were seeing the results of what was being talked about at the kitchen table. And then the schools that they went to, they were around kids that had the same kind of resources, or or at least pretended to have the same resources, which created an ecosystem in which they striving to do those things. So it's like the power of being a product of one's own environment.
No, that's powerful because they're just a product of the product. And meanwhile, we're a product of the system. And there are plenty of times I get so upset with people when, with somebody who just peeped game. And like Malcolm X says, you can never look down on someone who just figured out what's going on. What you learned a couple weeks ago because they just figured it out 2 days ago. You have to embrace them with humility and humanity because now they see the light. Now, with that being said, this person is filled with so much emotion because their eyes just got opened up. Oh, the system is working perfectly, proficiently, and efficient as ever because it's doing what it was designed to do. And this is the most perfect segue into talking about what's going on right now when we are talking about extreme systemic racism. When we look at our brothers that are in North Africa, in East Africa, in West Africa, South Africa's doing its own thing. Shout out to South Africa, though. Shout out to Sasha, that's my boy in South Africa. They are still under first of right, under France, England, Germany. We have places like Switzerland and where they still have first of right.
Meaning?
And I'm so glad you asked. It means if I have a product in my country, I can't sell it to the United States. I can't sell it to Canada. I can't sell it to Uganda. If I'm in Rwanda, I can't sell it to Uganda. I can't sell it to South Africa. I am forced to sell the raw material to France at a price that France decides. And then when they make the finished product, they can sell it back to me at any rate that they want to.
And
that is first of right.
The origins of that amazing negotiation?
Colonialism. Colonialism is still alive. It's just changed faces. What do you call it when a nation controls your capital? They control how much of your GDP you pay. So the $50 billion that France is getting from one nation, because that nation is being forced to buy back the polished goods that came from the raw materials of their own country. So it's like, how can this country be affluent if their resources are literally being taken from them at a cost, sold back to them at a cost? If we control the borders in a way where it makes it impossible to work with each other, every single nation, when we're talking about Central Africa, we're talking about Western, Eastern Africa, many parts of Northern Africa, it is almost impossible to go from country to country because as soon as you get up to a border, they have to check your papers. It's very, very expensive to be able to get these passports where we're talking about it's 5 to 10 times somebody's annual income to be able to afford this. And currency levels are kept in a manner to do so. So every time there's been a revolt, we see a country like France go in and say, oh, you're not listening to us anymore? So they pour concrete into the sewage systems. So they can't get clean water and they can't get rid of the waste. And then people start getting sick and dying. And then that's where we see some random celebrity go, oh, I'm going to make sure I come out there and I'm going to sing my new album. I know they want to hear it. And then it's this whole cycle. It is completely designed. The corruption is designed. That's the thing that I know I'm going to see in the comments. Africa is so corrupt. Is it corruption if the leader of a G20 country comes in and says, hey, we're going to give you a Benz, we're going to give you a house with a pool, we're going to get a BMW for the wife, and by the way, you take it or we kill them. We unalive them. You take it. Every African leader that we have seen over the last 200 years has wanted to fight corruption and have wanted to unite the nations, unalived.
It's interesting how history continues to repeat itself. Would you say that there's a correlation between the inter-country, commerce conversation relative to first of right and how tariffs work between countries?
Yes, I would say first of right is a more perfected form of tariffs because they have 100% control over your imports and your exports and the cost that you buy it and the currency that you buy it in and the value of that currency. We're talking about like layer on layer on layer on layer of control of a population. And you're doing this with a whole bunch of nations. So France has 14 countries like this. But yes, 100%. It is like a more powerful version of tariffs, where tariffs are normally saying, hey, we are going to hurt you from exporting something that is valuable to your nation because we're going to artificially raise the price of it because we're going to make sure that when our citizens want to buy your good or your raw material, that the price is artificially higher so they buy less from you and it cripples your economy. Or they turn to an alternative that we have strategically placed. It might be from your own nation. It might be from a nation that you have a treaty with or free trade with.
How did you process the Supreme Court Smackdown?
Thank you. I was getting so tired of seeing the only Supreme I saw was at Taco Bell because this court dog was mediocre hot dog water. I was just like, what are you guys doing? Like, I am no expert on the Constitution, but I can read and write pretty well. CSAT scores were amazing. Okay, amazing. Just understanding your duty to uphold the Constitution to the highest level, and we have not seen that with so much legislature that's come out. So to see them say, you know how in the Constitution it says that president can't levy these tariffs without our approval, and it has to go through Congress, and it has to be voted on by the people, or at least the representatives of the people. They're like, that's actually true, and it's in there, and we're upholding that. I didn't believe it at first. I thought I was on the Onion's website. I was like, this is what? So I am happy that they did it, but less than 24 hours later, he's throwing out, hey, there's going to be a 15% global, and it's just unfortunate because I know people that don't really trade, or if they don't have a traditional business, because there are many different types of businesses out there. But if you don't have a traditional business, you don't see how these tariffs hurt everyday people. I was at a local pub spot called Supernova, and I was there talking to a gentleman, and he's a tough dude. I've seen him around a couple times, bawling his eyes out. He's like, these tariffs going back and forth have pushed my costs of goods up so high. He's like, I had to fire 2 people today, and they are the best people in the world. One of them has a kid, and he's like, I only had a staff of 4. So now it's myself and the remaining ones that are doing multiple jobs, just trying to keep this thing afloat. And he's just crying. He's like, man, I felt like I failed myself. I did everything I could. I took equity out my house. I did this and this and that. He's like, I cut my salary down. I did everything I could to try to keep those people employed, and I hope they land on their feet. And I introduced them to about 10, 15 people, and I'm like, they're amazing. I just can't afford them. And he was bawling his eyes out. And that's the reality of these tariffs. I know a lot of people who maybe they work for a bigger company or they work in an industry that's not directly affected by raw materials and whatnot that we see in tariffs, or the direct cost of GPUs and CPUs and different processing chips. But like, this is real. It is hitting people in the chest, and it is affecting families in a heavy way. You just can't play with these numbers and just kidding, to ride the stock market up and down just to have your exits and entries to make personal wealth. It's the craziest, most irresponsible thing I think I've ever seen on a global scale.
There are a lot of layers to this conversation. I do feel that it's important to speak to one component there, which when I hear the conversations about business owners having to lay folks off and those hard decisions that comes along with operating a business, my mind immediately goes to how much of a business owner were they, as opposed to, because it's the difference between
a job owner.
It's levels. Yeah. So when every day is survival to the next, then you can expect for those types of things to happen. When you're intentional about actually running a business, which is separate from emotions, like when you're operating a business, it's a different calculation that goes into all of that. Because when you're operating a business, then you know what your sales lead, the funnel has to look like in order for you to hit your weekly sales goals or your monthly sales goals. And if you know that the pipeline is drying up upstream and you're starting to see less conversions downstream, then you know where you need to be working at. So if you allow for it to dry up upstream and then for it to finally make it to you, there was a lack of ownership in the responsibilities and accountabilities that are a part of running a business, operating a cash flowing business. A cash flowing business also plans for the things that impacts their industry. So if they operate a club, then they got a plan for the threats to the club. So operating because I know a lot of our folks be getting lounges and stuff like that, and that's great, because we need to have vibes and we need to get back together. We need to be congregating with each other in person. We need to be vibing, like my man Pimp C, God bless his soul. You know what I'm saying? Smell the cologne. You know what I'm saying? Like, we need to smell each other's cologne a little more. Like, that need to happen. But if you operating in that space, then you also got to understand that you're going to be dealing with permitting laws and the city and all that. So if you plan to operate in that arena, you also know that you got a budget in there, time to show up to the city council joints to build those relationships. And you got to know who the mayor is and how they move and how the city ordinances get passed and all of that. That's the function of business, and that is necessary regardless of industry. So although I empathize with the employees that were laid off, there is a certain level of accountability that I cannot sit back and, just, write the owner off from. Now, excuse me, not that owner, because I don't know that owner's situation. So this don't got nothing to do with that owner. This is speaking to a broader context of owning a business, especially in which one that employs people. Like the inherent responsibility of understanding what that sales funnel is to keep the people fed downstream. Because if you ain't paying attention to what's going on upstream, at some point it's going to have its contraction, and you got to deal with that. You got to eat that.
Yeah, that wealth storage piece, that's not just for your personal accounts. You got to have some money on the side, because as you grow and prosper, you're going to have different challenges, and you got to be ready. You even got to be ready for the things that you can't even imagine quite yet. And if we look at it from a business point of view, like, of course I empathize with him and his humanity, and it seems like he's figuring stuff out, and hopefully in the next month or so he'll be able to bring one of those employees back. But this all goes back to excellence, because when you are executing at the highest levels, you don't have that problem, because you are already growing. So instead of...
Or you know that you're not. If you know that you're not growing, then you're doing something about that.
Yeah, you're in tune with your numbers. What I was going to say is, like, if you're at a point where you're growing and then you start to go flat, then you're in a position where you're like, okay, we're not hiring anyone new. We're going to stick to our highest yielding products and services, and then you're just going to work it out, versus not executing at a high level, and then instead of going flat, things are going down. And now you're cutting employees to have to save the company. Completely different conversation, completely different mindset, completely different levels of execution. But the bigger thing is, it's a completely different level of service to the community, because businesses form the mentality and the zeitgeist of a neighborhood, of an area. Like, the businesses that are on Tejon make the personality of Tejon. And the way that those business owners and operators and investors choose to maneuver affects everyone, and everyone who ever comes through those areas. So we have to be mindful of that. Like, your business isn't just for you and your family and your legacy. Of course we know that. But for the broader need of the community that you are serving as well.
I spoke to the tariffs from the perspective of that business owner feeling those ripple effects, but tariffs more broadly, and you spoke to it. The Constitution says that Congress controls the purse. So, like any new taxes that are imposed on the American people, that comes through Congress, because Congress is supposed to be held accountable by the American people. Now, as I've said 1,000,001 times on this program, and I'm going to continue to say it, it's our responsibility as citizens to hold our elected officials accountable to the things that represent us. And until we are ready to really do that, we're going to continue to experience remixed versions of the same thing. But the idea that the president is just going to say, all right, so since the Congress ain't working at all, then fuck them. I'm just going to do all this, period. Like, carte blanche, and it don't matter if it violate the Constitution or not, we riding. That's dangerous. That's a dangerous game to play. And we're starting to feel some of the effects of the danger of that game. But the fact that the Supreme Court put some form of guardrail on the exercise of that power. I think it was Sweden that when the president went in Davos, I think he was talking about Sweden. He said he was talking to I'm not sure what their structure is, if it's a prime minister or president or what, but the head of state, talking to the head of state of Sweden, and he didn't like the way that the conversation felt. So, tariff. It's like, bruh, like that's not how tariffs are supposed to. The entire credibility of the United States and all of its history is vested in these decisions. And you just coming in willy-nilly, you didn't make me feel good. So tariff. Like, bruh, no, that's not how that works. So none of it passed the eye or the smell test from the beginning. And it's affirming to see that the Supreme Court stepped in and said, look, bruh, nah, that's not how that works, because it's dangerous. And it has already interrupted the flow of logistics and trade around the world in significant ways. I mean, a lot of the geopolitical sway that we've had through diplomacy is, them days are done, and it leaves us with only the opportunity of being the most in-your-face military. Because if we're not relying on diplomacy, then we got to rely on just pushing people around military, which we get to see that happen as well. So it's one of the things that's very interesting as we're going through these times. The president unilaterally invaded a sovereign country and extracted their president. Now, they can fancy up the terms however they want to fancy them up, but if another country indicted our president in their country and then sent members of their military and special forces to come and abduct our president, that would be an act of war. Like, it's no way around it. That would be an act of war. So I find it very hard, and like they justify it how they justify it with word salad.
Mm-hmm.
And an act of war was declared. Like, went in and just took the president, bro.
Like, put him in a Nike tracksuit, man. They said, not only are we taking you, but we taking that whack outfit you had off. This is what the kids in the streets is wearing. Like, I didn't believe it was a real photo until I verified it with several different sites. I was like, I noticed they ain't got him in the Atlanta special, and it's all gray. I don't know how the people at SNL and The Onion are even making up political satire like South Park, because reality is so
rich,
broken. It's crazy. It's asinine. And I couldn't agree with you more. It's an act of war. But we've been redefining a lot of things, over the last 4 to 6 years. Like, under Biden, that was a recession. And they just said, oh,
100%,
no,
100%,
it's not.
100%.
We're just going to change it.
They said the job number, like the unemployment rate has never been as low as it is now. And it's like, bro, firstly, your metrics are skewed to begin. Like, if you're going to tell me, we are not in a recession because of the unemployment rate and just leave it at that, then nah, bro, we got more to discuss, because that shit don't even make no sense. Because for one, the unemployment rate don't take into account those who are not applying for unemployment, those who have been kicked off of unemployment because they no longer qualify, and the
Mm-hmm.
folks that just said the hell with it, like they ain't even trying to enter the workforce. It don't take into account none of those folks. We don't never have that conversation about the percentage of our population that's not counted in those unemployment statistics. So for one, it's a skewed stat at just at face level. But then when you take it a step further, the quality of jobs. So there was a time where someone could work a job and be able to live off of working a job. The unfortunate thing about the United States is as we make more, we spend more. So the people that have increased their salary, the quality of life have kept pace with it as well, which just puts them in another cycle of hamster wheel chasing. You know what I'm saying? Like,
That's lifestyle creep. That is one of the hardest things to fight initially if you don't have the right mind piece from day one. And it's something that I've had to fight myself. I remember when being in my 20s and on paper they telling me I made 140,000. I was like, I'm a millionaire. Bottle service. I was like, what are we doing waiting in line? Bottle service. Like, I got to have a lot of fun. And then very quickly you realize what your money is going towards. And it wasn't the experiences that I wanted to have, nor was it the people that I wanted to keep in my inner circle. And when I looked at growing an account and how excited you can get to see it go from 2 to 5 to 10 to 25 to 50, like, oh my goodness, let's go. Let's go a little bit harder. Let's get this to 70. And, you make little in there, so you feed the idiot. So you're doing all this hard work, you're doing all this discipline, you need a reprieve to make sure you always keep your mind stayed golden, because otherwise you'll be like some of these silly people that do the FIRE movement. Cut all your bills in half, cut everything in half, get rid of this, that, and the third, and you can retire, 5 or 10 years or 20 years earlier. But in that retirement, you got to live the same way. So you get to be broke twice. And that math has never mathed to me. But it was interesting. I saw a person who has been doing this for over 10 years now. They were one of the first people to join this FIRE movement. And they're speaking to a psychologist. And they're like, I just can't. So they ended up starting another business, and it was very successful. And they had a very successful exit. So money is up. And they're like, I still can't spend money. I still feel so guilty. Like I can't, and I have the money, but I hate the way that I'm living. I'm like, oh man, you don't want to put yourself in that position,
Right.
We got to have a certain quality of life, but that doesn't mean we're keeping up with the Joneses. We have to be able to find luxury in the simple things.
Circling what I was saying that with the Supreme Court, as we watch the president just kind of do his own thing and not really respect the Constitution, from abducting other presidents to Americans being killed by federal forces in United States streets. Like it's been a lot of things that have gone on, but for them to finally chime in and say, hold on, man, step too far. It is very clear here that tariffs are to be controlled by Congress. Definitively. Point blank, period. 6-3 vote.
Mm-hmm. That was so definitive. I was like, my goodness.
We can talk about how the United States has not necessarily benefited our ancestors, but the reality is there is a framework that creates the opportunity to fight for better. Now, if that framework is completely just thrown out altogether, then that's a whole nother world that I don't know if I want to experience that. So I don't endorse how all of this stuff is set up and how it operates. And there is certainly opportunity for it to be improved. But to just blow all of this shit up or just to completely disregard it, that's not the right answer. So there has to be guardrails. There has to be some rules that we uniformly respect and kind of move from there. And when we're not able to do that, if that time comes, then, you know, we in a different kind of space. So again, it was refreshing for all of those reasons to see the Supreme Court say, nah, bro, good try.
Yeah, one of the jokes I saw was like, man, everybody at the Supreme Court must holding a bunch of Bitcoin. And that's what made them vote differently. But it is refreshing, and then we always have to keep hope. And the beautiful thing about life in general, even when things have gotten really dark here, and it's gotten dark in this nation, you know, it's never quite as bad as you think it's going to be. And then on the other side, when it's something that you're very hopeful for, it might not be as great as you thought it was going to be either. So we're living in between that space, and we're dancing in the rain.
Right. So the last thing that I have to do is some cleanup from a previous episode where, although it is very exciting to see a governor like Westmore with his energy, charisma, competence, and courage, he is not the first black governor. The first black governor was L. Douglas Wilder in Virginia, who was elected in 1989 and served until 1994. And then there was Deval Patrick, who was elected in Massachusetts in 2006 and served till 2015. And David
That's still
Patterson.
Crazy. We were alive.
Yeah. And David Patterson became the governor in 2008 when Eliot Spitzer resigned in New York. I know I'm not going to always get everything right. I'm far from perfect, but I don't want to be on here saying some wrong shit. So, like, that was something that, as dope as it is to recognize Westmore for what he represents, he ain't the first.
1,000,000%. You know, you guys are on a journey where you're learning and growing with us while we're learning and growing. So it's just going to keep better and better and better and better. It's almost like every week I want to say this is the worst it's ever going to be when you're riding with us on the asset class, because it's constant, intentional progression.
Already. So with that, as we always say, nothing that we're discussing is intended to discourage or gin up fear or create the stagnant paralysis through analysis that I described earlier in this episode. It's the exact contrary, which is to understand the state of affairs to then leverage said state of affairs towards the advancement of our community collectively. As my man Earl always say at the beginning of that episode in the disclaimer, each one, reach one, teach one, and that's how we grow community. That's my man Earl.
My boy Jesse.
It's been the Asset Class. Thank you for listening.